Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Teaching narrative reading by using the subtext strategy for Islamic senior high school student. Abstract. The objectives of this study were to find out whether or not there was a significant improvement before and after the treatment on the 11th grade students' reading comprehension scores at one Islamic senior high school in Palembang by using subtext strategy, and to find out whether or not there was a significant difference on the 11th grade students' reading comprehension score between the students who were taught by using subtext strategy and those who were not. In this study, quasi-experimental design using pretest, post-test, non-equivalent group design was used. There were 60 students taken as sample. Each class consisted of 30 students from class 11 IPS2 as control group and class 11 IPS3 as experimental group. In quality, the data reading comprehension test was used. Introduction. English is a global language that cannot be separated from our daily life. It suggests at least 150 million people use English fluently as a foreign language. Social culture purpose and education with developing career. According to Sarifian, English as an international language refers to paradigm for thinking, research, and practice. This reality encourage many countries to put English into the formal school curriculum that will be taught from elementary school until universities, and one of those countries is Indonesia. In Indonesia, English is very important to be mastered. Matarima and Hamdan state the English language teaching becomes increasingly important as the first foreign language in Indonesia, therefore the government requires. In relation to this, however, comprehending and reading text is not an easy activity. Peto and Jane argue that reading is perhaps the most difficult language skill to teach, for each involves so many different elements such as mechanical eye movement, grammar, vocabulary, and intellectual comprehension. Similarly, Colonel D. and Oakhill also state that a typical characteristic of children is often difficulty in understanding a written text. They do not seem to search out the pieces of information they are looking for. In reading activities, students not only read but also do other activities unconsciously, such as thinking, interacting, speaking, listening, and writing. Difficulties and obstacles faced in the process of teaching and learning reading cannot be considered as the only reason for students to not be able to master their reading skill. In Indonesia, reading still becomes a problem for the students. World Bank and EAA describes that in East of Asia, Indonesian people had the lowest level in reading English. Indonesian student reading skills is lower than other countries. In Indonesia, student reading skill is lower than other countries. The mean score of Indonesian student was 397, while the OECD average score was 493. The position rank of Indonesia in PISA reading is 62 out of the 70 countries participating, reported from Program for International Student Assessment. The data show that Indonesian reading skill is still poor. It means that Indonesian students need a strategy to improve their reading skill. Problem in narrative reading comprehension also happened to the 11th grade student of MA Patra Mandiri Palembang, one Islamic senior high school in Palembang. Based on the informal interview with the teacher of English and the 11th grade student, there were many problems that students face in learning reading. The problem were the student had lack of motivation in reading English text. The student had poor vocabulary, so they were not able to guess the meaning easily. The student could not predict the content of the narrative text. The student got difficulty to identify the character of narrative text, and some of the students took too much time in comprehending the text. It happened because there was no interesting way to attack their interest in narrative reading text. Literature review. review. Reading comprehension and narrative text. Reading comprehension is the main purpose of reading activity. All readers intend to have connection to material that they read. Of course, the process of reading comprehension is also complex and it takes time for a reader to acquire the meaning of reading material. According to Dorm and Sophus, 2005, comprehending involves interpreting and synthesizing ideas in ways that influence the reader's mind. The reader needs to be able to figure out the author purpose presenting the material, comprehending some valuable information stated in the passage in relation to comprehending the overall content of reading material. Furthermore, Westwood stated that reading comprehension can be defined as an activity thinking process. Narrative is text type that tells about story, whether true story, problematic personal experience, or fictional. However, the general purpose of narrative text is to entertain, engage the reader in an imaginative experience, but actually there are many other purposes of narrative text. Subtext strategy. Several theories about subtext strategy have been stated by a number of experts. Leland, Lewison, and Hart define that subtext strategy helps students to identify meaning that are not explicitly stated in text. According to White, the subtext strategy is applied for grade level in K-12 is equal with senior high school level in Indonesia. This strategy can be applied in fiction text. It could also be applied to some non-fiction readings, such as history or social students text. Because of that, this strategy can be applied in fiction and non-fiction text. Research design, research site, and participant. This study used a quasi-experimental design. Pretest, protest, then non-equivalent group design. There were two groups, experimental and control group, which was given the same pretest and post. The experimental group was given treatment by using subtext strategy, but the control group was not. The population of this research was 11 grade students of M.A. Patra Pantri Palembang, one of Islamic Senior High School in Palembang. Data collection and analysis. In this study, we used reading comprehension tests in the form of multiple choice to collect the data. The test items in the pretest were the same as those of post-test because the purpose and after treatment. Pretest was given before the treatment. The purpose of giving pretest of the student was to know the student's English reading comprehension score before implementing subtext strategy. Meanwhile, post-test was given after the treatment. The post was administered to know the student English reading comprehension scores after implementing subtext strategy. The result of this test was compared to be result of pretest. In order to measure the student progress talk by using subtext strategy, the data analysis technique used was qualitative analyzing the data obtained from quasi-experimental design were calculated by means SPSS 20 software. Based on the recent analysis of student pretest score in control group, it showed that two students got 32.5. Descriptive statistics. In the descriptive statistics, the total of sample n mention minimum and maximum scores, mean score, standard deviation were analysis. The score were obtained from 1. Pretest score in control group, 2. post-test score in control group, 3. pretest score in experimental group, and post score in experimental group. In measuring normality test, in measure homogeneity test, result of hypothesis testing. In this study, paired sample tests used to measure significant improvement on student narrative reading comprehension achievement score talk by using subtext strategy at 1 Islamic Senior High School in Palembang before and after treatment. Independent sample test was used to measure a significant difference on student narrative reading comprehension achievement score talk by using subtext strategy and those who were not. Based on table analysis, it was found that the P output is 0.000 with DF 29 and TIFLO 11.399, it can be stated there is a significant improvement from student pretest to post-score in experimental group talk using subtext strategy. Discussion. Based on the finding above, some interpretations were made as follows. After conducting the research, it was found that there was a significant improvement from student pretest to post-test score in experimental and control group from the result of pair sample t-test analysis. In other words, student reading comprehension estimate in experimental group improved after they were taught by using subtext strategy. In addition, we found that the student faced difficulties before the treatment in experimental group. The problems were the lack of student motivation in reading English text. The student got difficult to identify the characteristic of narrative text. Finally, based on explanation above, subtext strategy was successful applied to the 11th grade student of one Islamic Senior High School in Palembang. Conclusion. There are some conclusions that can be drawn from this research referred to the and interpretation presented in the previous chapter. First, based on the result of pretest to post-test, subtext strategy significantly improved student reading comprehension score to the 11th grade student of one Islamic Senior High School in Palembang. Second, there was significant difference on student reading comprehension score to the 11th grade students who were taught by using subtext strategy and those who were taught by strategy that was usually used by teacher of one Islamic Senior High School in Palembang. Therefore, it can be inferred that the teaching reading comprehension in narrative text by using subtext strategy can be considered as an alternative strategy that can be used. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.